The return to the GCS Chrysalis was made in heavy silence. The shuttle bay doors closed with a soft thump, sealing away the view of the dark, spiked ship they now knew as the Homebound. The team moved like sleepwalkers, their environment suits hanging limply from their hands. The data, the recordings, the image of strawberries on the bridge, it all swirled in their heads, too big to process. On the Chrysalis bridge, the mood was one of alarm. Captain Iria, a being of graceful limbs and calm demeanor, watched the initial reports scroll across her screen. A confirmed Void Reaver. And you say, humans? Inside? Living? Her voice was a mix of disbelief and dread. In the briefing room, the debate began. It was not a calm discussion. It was a controlled panic. This is a catastrophic security breach, argued Verl, the head of security. His feathery crest flared in agitation. A Class 15 Death World weapon is now in the hands of a species we considered harmless. They have a Reaver, Captain. Our entire defensive doctrine is based on the assumption that no one but the Creon could operate one. We must alert the fleet. We must track them down and contain them. They are now the single greatest threat in this sector. Tay stood quietly, letting the fear wash over him. He understood it. To Verl, and to many, the equation was simple. Lethal ship plus humans equals new Kreon. Jin, who had been silent since leaving the Homebound, finally spoke. His voice cut through the nervous chatter. Did you look at the data, Verl? Did you see what they did with that greatest threat? He didn't wait for an answer. He activated the room's holoprojector. Images bloomed in the air. The dormitory with its woven hammocks, the note from Sujin, the child's drawing on the bridge console, the vibrant hydroponic garden where the war table should have been. He played the final log from Hana. Her young, calm voice filled the sterile briefing room. Do not be afraid of this ship. It is no longer a weapon. It's our house. When it finished, the room was quieter, but the tension was still there. Verl shook his head. A clever ruse. They lull us with gardening. Then they strike. They have the ultimate predatory vessel. They must think like predators now. No, Jin said, the word final and hard. He was a soldier. He knew predators. That's what you're not seeing. They didn't win by being more lethal. They won by being less so. He pointed at the image of the pain altar from their first entry. The Creon's power came from this, from causing pain. It was their fuel, their art, their purpose. The humans were useless to that. Their pain was flat, the log said. It gave no power. He stepped closer to the hologram of the bridge garden. So what did the humans use for fuel? What was their purpose? He tapped the image of the strawberries. They used sunlight, and water, and patience. Their purpose was a clean breath, a good meal, a child's drawing on a console. They didn't take the ship's guns and go conquer a planet. They took the ship's garden lights and grew food. They didn't become monsters. They tamed one. They didn't use the claws. They planted flowers in them. Captain Iria listened, her large eyes thoughtful. You are saying their strength is not martial. It is. Transformative. It is stubborn, Tay added, finding his voice. It is the strength to look at the worst possible place in the universe and say, this can be a home. We can make the air clean here. They are not Death Worlders in the Creon sense. They are Life Worlders. They bring life with them. Even here. The debate raged for hours. Fear against reason. Old nightmares against a new, baffling reality. In the end, Captain Iria made a decision. We will not alert the war fleet. Not yet, but we will find them. We will follow the course from their navigation console. We need to see what they have become. We owe them that much for solving the riddle of the Creon. The chrysalis was fast. The homebound's course was slow, meandering, years old. It took weeks of travel, skirting unknown nebulae and silent star systems. The tension on the chrysalis was a living thing. Every sensor ping was a potential ambush. Then, they found them. It was in a quiet system with a gentle yellow star. There was a small, rocky planet with a thin but breathable atmosphere. And in its orbit, hanging against the black like a strange, beautiful form, was the homebound. But it was not alone, and it was not attacking. Scans showed a bustling, peaceful scene. Two smaller, battered human freighters were docked to the homebound's former weapon ports, now serving as airlocks. A stream of shuttles moved between the planet's surface and the ship itself. It was changed. More patches of what looked like soil and greenery were visible on its once bare hull, like moss growing on a stone. Light glowed from viewports, warm yellow light, not the cold blue of battle lamps. There, trading, the sensor officer reported, confusion in his voice. I'm reading exchanges. Organic matter from the planet's surface. For manufactured goods from the homebound. The goods are refined metals, tools, textiles, high quality. Open a hailing channel, Captain Iria ordered, her heart in her throat. No weapons, just an open channel. On the main viewer, the homebound grew larger. Up close, they could see the details. The terrifying spikes now held communication arrays and weather scanners. One of the massive kinetic gun barrels had been repurposed, its end sealed with a crystal dome. A greenhouse. The channel crackled, then cleared. The face that appeared on the screen was a young woman. She had dark hair tied back and intelligent, calm eyes. She looked to be in her late 20s. She wore a simple, practical tunic made of a gray fabric that might have been recycled from command webbing. Behind her, the bridge was visible. The strawberry garden was still there, larger now. A man who looked like an older Min was tending to it. A child ran past in the background, laughing. Unidentified vessel. This is Hannah of the GCS Homebound, she said, her voice polite, wary, but not afraid. Do you need assistance? We have fresh water and medical supplies if required. Captain Iria was momentarily speechless. This was the voice from the logs, grown up. The child of the silent war. Tay stepped forward. Hannah of the homebound. I am Tay of the Galactic Concordance vessel Chrysalis. We found your old logs. We saw your message. Do not grieve. The air is clean here. On the screen, Hannah's face softened. A slow, genuine smile touched her lips. She looked over her shoulder, calling out, Grandmother Sujin. They found the note. An older woman with kind eyes and streaks of gray in her hair moved into view, placing a hand on Hannah's shoulder. She looked at the Concordance crew, her gaze knowing and peaceful. We are glad you are not grieving, Sujin said, her voice gentle. And we are glad the air is clean for you too. Welcome. Would you like to come aboard? We have strawberries. They are very good this season. The offer hung in the air. An invitation onto the most feared warship design in history. For a taste of fruit, Jin looked at Captain Iria and gave a single. Slow nod. Captain Iria took a breath, the weight of centuries of fear lifting from her shoulders. The story was not one of a new threat. It was a lesson. The deadliest ship from a Class 15 death world was not a weapon anymore. It was a home, a farm, a trading post. Its new crew were not conquerors. They were gardeners, engineers, and children who laughed on the bridge. We would be honored, Captain Iria replied, her own smile breaking through. Thank you for the invitation. On the screen, Hannah's smile widened. Behind her, the warm light of the homebound glowed against the cold stars, a defiant, gentle beacon in the dark. The message was now clear for the whole galaxy to hear. The corridor leading to the heart of the ship felt different now. It was no longer a passage into a monster's den, but a hallway in a house whose owners had stepped out. The dread was replaced by a tense curiosity. What had the survivors built after their long, quiet war? Tay led, with Jin close behind, their lights cutting through the permanent twilight. They passed more signs of the transition. A bank of Kreon weapon lockers stood empty, their terrifying contents removed. In their place, fixed to the wall with bolts, was a simple rack holding long, polished rods of metal fashioned from ship's conduit, their ends sharpened to fine points. They were spears. Simple, brutal, effective tools for hunting or defense, but not the weapons of a conquering army. They were the tools of people securing their perimeter. They disarmed the ship, Jin observed, running a hand over the smooth handle of one spear. They took the teeth out of the monster. The final door to the command bridge was the largest they had encountered. It was a Kreon iris door, a circular maw of interlocking black blades. But it was frozen halfway open, manually jammed with a thick spar of support beam, just like the door to the dormitory. Someone had wanted it to stay open forever. They had to turn sideways to slip through the gap. The bridge of the Void Reaver spread before them, and for a long moment, no one spoke. The Concordance teen's lights swept across a scene of impossible contradiction. This was the nerve center of galactic terror, and it had been turned into a garden and a nursery. The Kreon command thrones were gone. Not destroyed, but meticulously dismantled. Their pieces jagged shards of obsidian-like material and bundles of severed neural cables were stacked neatly in a corner, like lumber for a future project. In the center of the room, where a holographic war table might have been, was a large, thriving hydroponic garden. Tubes of clear plasglass bubbled with water, lit from within by soft, full-spectrum bulbs powered by a small, humming generator of human design. In the tubes grew strawberries, their red fruit glowing like jewels. Leafy greens and vines with small tomatoes climbed a trellis made of woven cable, but the most stunning transformation was the main viewport. It was not a screen, but an actual window, a slab of thick, transparent crystal 2 meters tall. The Kreon had likely used it to watch the worlds they burned. Now it framed the endless starfield, a breathtaking mural of cold beauty. And directly in front of it, bolted to the floor where the captain's throne once sat, was a new chair. It was constructed from a pilot's seat, likely salvaged from the human colony ship, fused with pieces of polished Kreon metal for armrests. It was a command chair, but it looked comfortable, worn. They took the helm, Tay whispered. His voice full of wonder. Jin moved to the main console. It was a complex mess of Kreon biointerfaces, but human ingenuity was stamped all over it. The sharp, pain-inducing contact spikes had been sheared off or capped with blobs of smooth resin. Overlays of thin, flexible screens were stuck in place, showing scrolling data in common galactic script. Manual control sticks, crafted from machined pipe, were grafted onto the sides. A child's drawing a stick figure family standing under a yellow sun was taped carefully to one edge of the console. Tay found the ship's AI core access panel. It was open. Inside, the pulsating, meat-like Kreon core was still present, but it was encased in a cage of finely soldered wires and cooling rods. A standard human data slate was spliced into its heart. Tay carefully activated the slate. A soft, feminine voice filled the bridge. It was young, calm, and utterly human. It was not a log of fear or combat. It was a ship's status report. Log entry, Day 1-1000-2-100-17. This is Hana, recording for the homebound diary. Fruit yield is good. Strawberry nutrient mix 3 is optimal. Dad says the secondary power coupling is holding. We've finished the translation matrix for the nav console. The old Kreon star maps are, Not nice. We've plotted a course away from their marked targets. We're aiming for the fringe of the old human trade lane, the one Grandma Sujin told us about. Morale is stable. We practice Common Galactic every night. This ship is quiet. It's a good quiet. The voice was so ordinary, so domestic. It was devastating. Hana, a girl born in the belly of this beast Jin, stood frozen, looking at the child's drawing. The monster's brain had been rewired to run a farm and navigate by a grandmother's stories. Tay played the next log. Log entry, day 1-1000-3-100-5. We've decided on the name. Put it in the main system. We're not the Korean Void Reaver Gra anymore. We are the GCS Homebound. Because that's what we are. We're going home, or as close as we can find. The ship feels different with a name. It feels like ours. A series of command prompts flashed on the slate. Tay saw the moment the change was made. The ship's terrifying Kreon designation was wiped from its core identity. In its place, in clean letters, was registered GCS Homebound. The final log entry was the shortest. Final entry. Kreon biosignatures have been at 0 for 3 consecutive cycles. Neutralization protocol is complete. The homebound is secure. We have adjusted course for the last known human transit vector, as per the archives. Estimated travel time is long, but we have good soil, good light, and clean air. If you find this, we are long gone. Do not be afraid of this ship. It is no longer a weapon. It's our house. Signing off. The voice stopped. The silence on the bridge was profound. The Chrysalis team looked around at the strawberries, the patched console, the view of the stars. The evidence was no longer of a takeover, but of an inheritance. A renovation. Laya, the botanist, was crying quietly, her hand over her mouth. They planted strawberries on the bridge. She managed to say Jin finally moved. He walked slowly to the viewport and placed his hand against the cool crystal, looking out at the stars they had navigated by. He thought of his own home, a peaceful concordance world of gentle seas and wide skies. He tried to imagine being born here in this metal cave, taught that the bridge was a garden and that the monsters were gone because your parents were patient and clever. They didn't just survive, Jin said, his back to the room. They didn't just win. They redeemed it. They took the worst thing they could imagine, and they made it right. They made it carry them home. Tay was at the navigation console. He called up the last course input. A star chart, partly Kreon, partly human, glowed on the makeshift screen. A bright line extended from their current location, not towards any concordance world or Kreon hive, but into a quiet, unexplored sector of the galactic arm. A hopeful line heading towards nowhere in particular, and everywhere they wanted to be. The homebound. Tay repeated the name. It was perfect. It was not a ship of war or a ship of fate. It was a ship of intention. A vessel carrying its inhabitants not to conquest, but to a destination of their own choosing. They had found the most lethal ship from a Class 15 death world, and with quiet, stubborn hands, they had sanded down its claws, filled its guns with soil, and pointed its nose towards the light. He looked at the little drawing taped to the console. The family under the sun. He knew then that the story they would have to tell the Concordance was not a warning, but a revelation. The humans hadn't become the new monsters. They had become the new gardeners. And the most terrifying warship in the galaxy had become a pot for their strawberries. The light in the dormitory was warm from the portable lamps, but the story it now told was cold and hard. The note from Sujin and the fearful Kreon logs hung in the air, demanding a past. Tay's mind raced, trying to see it. The Chrysalis team was quiet, overwhelmed. So Tay began to speak, his voice low, piecing together the fragments into a picture. He wasn't just guessing. He was reading the room, the ship, the evidence. It started with a capture, he began, his eyes on the woven hammocks. A Creon harvest ship, maybe this very one, found a small human vessel. A colony transport, perhaps. Not a warship. Something slow and full of life. He imagined it. The sudden violence, the shriek of metal. The humans, maybe 30 or 40 of them, would have been terrified. People like Sujin, a botanist, used to tending plants. People like Min, an engineer who built things. People like Day, who might have been a soldier once, but was now just a farmer hoping for a new start. They would have been pulled from their broken ship, confused and helpless, thrown into the dark hold of the reaver like curiosities. The Creon would have seen them as soft, Tay continued. Fragile, their bones break easily, their skin tears. They have no claws, no natural armor. To a Creon, they were not even good sport, just interesting biomatter. Maybe for testing weapons. Maybe for the pain altars. Jin shifted, his face grim. He could imagine the scene too well. But the Creon made a mistake, Tay said, a flicker of something like pride in his voice. 2 mistakes, really. First, they put them all together. They didn't isolate them. They threw them into a single pen. Second, they ignored them. To the Creon, the real work was out among the stars, hunting bigger prey. The humans were a side project. They would check on them, maybe torment one to power a system, and leave. They spent long cycles in hibernation, their great bodies slowing to conserve energy for the next raid. He walked over to the wall, touching the etched message. That was the humans' window. The first thing they did was stop being prisoners. They became colonists of this ship. This was their new, horrible world, and they had to make it livable. He pointed to the rerouted console. Min, the engineer, he would have started there. He saw the Creon tools. Brutal, but tools. He saw how the ship worked. He watched, he learned. He figured out how to reroute a little power, to open a sealed door, to disable a camera that worked on psychic echoes. Tay moved to the air vent, where the hybrid moss grew, and Sujin, the botanist. She had her sample kits, maybe seeds, cultures. She saw the Creon biofilm, a nasty thing that helped recycle waste. She began experimenting, crossbreeding. She wasn't trying to make a weapon. She was trying to make an air filter. But to the Creon biology, her gentle, cleansing moss, it was a corrosive. It got into the vents, into their hibernation pods. It ate the neural lining, the log said. He picked up the kimchi container again. And the rest? They were cooks, teachers, medics, parents. They had to eat. The Creon rations were vile, barely digestible. So they used them. They fermented them. They took the toxic Creon fungi and carefully, over months, read the poison out, turned it into food. Every meal was a quiet act of rebellion. Every clean breath was a victory. Jin interrupted, his tactical mind engaging. But the Creon were still there, awake sometimes. How did they not just slaughter them all? Tay nodded. That's where Day came in. The soldier. He wouldn't have fought a war. He would have taught them guerrilla survival. When the Creon hibernated, the humans moved. They mapped the ship. They identified critical systems. Not the guns, not at first. The life support, the waste processing, the internal security nodes. Tay's scanner cast a holographic blueprint of the ship into the air. Here, he pointed to a junction. The Creon pain conduits. They channeled psychic agony from the altars to power secondary systems. Min and Day, they figured out how to reverse the flow. They tricked a system. When the Creon next tried to torture a human to power a door mechanism, it fed back. It poured that pain into the Creon operator instead. The log said, the energy converter feeds back. He let that sink in. The Creon, masters of pain, defeated by their own technology. It was a war of 1,000 small cuts, Tay said, his voice full of awe. They didn't have bombs. They had bacteria cultures that upset Kreon digestion. They had tweaks to the gravity plates in the Kreon quarters, making their sleep restless, weakening them. They carefully introduced Earth mites that ate the specific polymer coating on the Kreon's weaponry, causing it to jam. Every single thing the humans did was on a scale the Kreon considered beneath notice. They were fighting an enemy that lived in the dirt, in the air, in the wires. An enemy that was, to them, invisible. He pictured it, the Kreon waking from hibernation, feeling sick, weak. Their tools malfunctioning, their ship feeling wrong. They would hear tiny scratches in the walls, see shadows that vanished. They would feel a deep, existential unease. The silent plague. The humans weren't screaming in terror, so they gave no psychic fuel. They were just there, adapting, surviving, waiting. The final act wasn't a battle, Tay concluded, the hologram fading. It was a turning off of the lights. The humans, by then, had control of the environmental systems for their own sector. They figured out the Kreon hibernation cycle. One cycle, they just didn't let the Kreon wake up. They adjusted the gas mix. They let Sujin's hybrid moss do its work in the air scrubbers. They turned the Kreon's own biosupport against them. The logs said it. We sleep, and they move like ghosts. They went to sleep as masters of the ship, and they never woke up. The dormitory was utterly silent. The horror was gone, replaced by a deep, chilling respect. The Concordance team looked at the humble room with new eyes. This wasn't just where survivors slept. It was a command center for a different kind of war. A war won not with strength, but with stubbornness. Not with fury, but with quiet, relentless care. Jin looked at the little carved rabbit still in Tay's bag. He thought of someone, maybe a parent, trying to comfort a child born in this metal hell, carving that small piece of wood. A symbol of a soft, gentle earth creature, made in the heart of the galaxy's most lethal machine. So they won, Jin stated, not as a question. They lived, Tay corrected softly. That was their victory. They turned a place of death into a place where they could have a home, even for a little while. And then he looked towards the corridor that led deeper into the ship, towards the bridge. When it was all over, and the ship was finally quiet, they had a choice. They could have fled in escape pods. But they didn't. He turned his gaze back to the note on the wall. Do not grieve. The air is clean here. They stayed, Tay said. They cleaned their new house. And then they must have decided to see where it could take them. The silence in the corridor felt heavier now, loaded with questions. The little wooden rabbit seemed to burn a hole in the sample bag on Tay's belt. Its presence was a soft, impossible sound in the crushing quiet of the dead warship. Jin moved forward with renewed caution, his weapon no longer just pointing at shadows, but swinging between them, as if the source of the carving could be both a threat and a victim. A child's toy, Jin muttered, his voice echoing slightly in the tall, dark passage. In a Korean reaver. It makes no sense. It is evidence, Tay corrected gently, his scanner painting the air with soft blue light. It changes the question. We are no longer asking what killed the Kreon. We are asking who else was here, and what was their fate. They reached a junction. One corridor, wider and lined with ominous, pulsating fossilized veins, sloped downward towards what scans suggested was the main power core. The other was narrower, a service duct. A faint, almost imperceptible current of air drifted from the service duct. Stale, but moving. There, Tay said, pointing. Environmental systems are dead, but air is circulating. Something is creating a draft. Jin nodded, taking the lead. The duct was a tight fit, forcing them to walk single file. The oppressive bioorganic walls closed in around them. After 50 meters, the duct opened into a larger space. This was not a Creon chamber. It had been one, perhaps a storage bay for bioweapon pods, but it had been utterly transformed. The team's lights swept across the room, revealing a scene that left them speechless. Hammocks, at least 20 of them, were strung between the sturdy, spine-like protrusions on the walls. They were not made of fabric, but of a silvery gray material that Tay recognized as shredded and rewoven Creon command webbing, a material designed to be incredibly strong and resistant to energy fire. Shelves were fashioned from broken pieces of deck plating stacked against the wall. On them rested containers. Some were standard Creon ration tins, now empty and neatly stacked. Others were different. They were made from clean sections of alien plant stalks, sealed with resin, and labeled with small, careful symbols. Tay moved closer. One label read, in simple block letters, garlic chive. Another, kimchi, type 3. This is a living quarters. One of the other researchers, a young botanist named Laya, breathed. A dormitory. Jin approached a hammock and touched the material. They took the stuff the Creon used to tie up prisoners and made beds from it. His tone was not quite admiration, but a deep, unsettled respect. On the wall beside the entrance, someone had used a sharp tool, perhaps a piece of metal, to etch words into the softer bioorganic material. The script was not Creon, whose writing was all jagged slashes. This was rounded, clear, and in common galactic. Tay's light illuminated it, and he read the words aloud, his voice barely a whisper in the vast, quiet room. Do not grieve. The air is clean here. Sujin. The message hung in the air. It was not a distress call. It was not a warning. It was a comfort, left behind for anyone who might find this place. A note to say the occupants had been okay. Sujin, Tay repeated. A human name. Simple. Korean, if the databases are correct. He turned to Jin, his earlier scholarly detachment gone, replaced by raw urgency. This was a human habitat. They weren't just passing through. They lived here, in the belly of a void reaver. The implications began to crash over them. The peaceful concordance, which included species that wrote poetry about nebulas and grew cities like crystal gardens, had a very clear file on humanity. Species H357, physically fragile. High adaptability. Social cooperative survival model. Origin, Class 8 world. A Class 8 was considered lively, even dangerous, but nothing like a 15. Humans were noted as curious and resilient, but they were not warriors. They were not supposed to be able to do. This, Jin's mind went to the tactical problem. They were prisoners. The Creon must have taken them. A harvesting raid on a human outpost. They threw them in here like interesting insects. But the insects didn't die. Tay was already moving towards a console in the corner. It was a Creon interface, a nightmare of exposed nerve-like cables and sharp contact points meant to be driven into a Creon's flesh. But it had been modified. A flat, smooth piece of metal, likely from a ration tin, was welded over the worst of the spikes. Wires had been rerouted into a small, handheld power cell of human design. They got it working, Tay said, his fingers hovering over the makeshift controls. They accessed the ship's logs. With a deep breath, he activated the playback. The power cell flickered, and the room filled with sound dot. It was not a human voice. It was a Creon voice, a deep, guttural rasp that sounded like stones grinding together. The translation software in Tay's scanner struggled, piecing together fragments, the soft ones. The silent plague. They do not scream, right? Their pain is flat, useless. Another voice, higher, laced with what could only be described as panic. Containment failure in Sector Gra. The growth, the green growth, it is in the vents. It eats the neural lining. A third log, the voice weak slurred. The tools, they turn our own tools. The energy converter, it feeds back. We sleep, and they move like ghosts. No psychic scent. They are voids, voids that bite. The final log was just a whisper. We harvested a death. We brought it home. It is in the walls now. The recording ended. The silence it left behind was profound. Jin stared at the darkened console. A plague. They called the humans a plague. A silent one, Tay said, the pieces locking together in his mind with a terrifying, brilliant clarity. Deaf to psychic pain. That's what the logs mean. The Creon's power, their culture, it was based on sensing and manipulating agony. What use is a predator that cannot sense the fear of its prey? What good is a torture device if the subject's pain is quiet? He looked around the dormitory, at the neat hammocks, the labeled supplies. The humans weren't stronger. They were invisible. And they were clever. They didn't fight the Creon head-on. They infested them. He walked to the shelf and picked up one of the kimchi containers. He carefully pried off the resin seal. The smell that wafted out was pungent, spicy, and alive. It was the smell of fermentation, of microbiology, of persistence. It was the absolute opposite of the sterile death that should have filled this ship. Laya, the botanist, was examining the walls near the air vent. "Sir," she said, "this moss here, it's not earth moss. It's a hybrid, I think. I think it's a cross between a Creon biofilm and a terrestrial lichen. Engineered. It's an air scrubber. They bred a new plant to clean the air." The horror of the Creon logs now stood in stark contrast to the quiet, domestic ingenuity of this room. The humans had been outmatched in every physical way. So they had fought a different war. A war of biology. A war of patience. A war fought not with shouts, but with whispers. Not with explosions, but with fermentation. Not with terror, but with a simple message on a wall, telling someone not to grieve. Jin leaned against a hammock post, his weapon lowered for the first time. He was a soldier. He understood battles of attrition, of will. He looked at the note from Su-Jin, then at the harsh, fearful words of the dying Creon. A slow, grim realization settled on him. They didn't win a battle, he said, his voice low. They didn't have one. The Creon went to sleep on their ship, and they never woke up. The humans just lived here until the monsters were gone. Tay nodded, placing the kimchi container back on the shelf with reverence. The story was no longer a mystery. It was a testament. They had come to document a tomb, and instead they had found a kitchen, a bedroom, and a garden. The most lethal ship from a Class 15 death world had been turned into a home, and its new owners had left a note before moving on. The silence of deep space was not really silent, not if you knew how to listen. To the scanners of the GCS Chrysalis, it hummed with data streams, with the distant whisper of stars, and with the slow, cold breath of the void. But here, in the quarantine sector designated Omicron 77, the hum had dropped to a wary murmur. The Chrysalis, a research vessel of the Galactic Concordance, hung like a cautious silver moth before something dark and jagged. The object was a ship, but to call it merely a ship felt wrong. It was a fossil of fear. Its silhouette was all harsh angles and protruding spines, like the bones of some vast, predatory creature. Scans had already confirmed the worst. It was a Void Reaver class, a design that originated from one place only, Creon, a Class 15, Death World. The words alone sent a shiver through the Concordance crew. Creon was a legend of nightmares. A planet with gravity that could crush most species, an atmosphere laced with neurotoxins, and a biosphere where flora hunted fauna. And the Kreon themselves? Beings of immense physical power and a culture built on conquest and pain. This ship, this Reaver, was a masterpiece of lethal engineering. Finding one adrift, powerless, was like finding a sleeping dragon. On the bridge of the Chrysalis, the mood was tense. Xenoarchaeologist Tay watched the main viewer, his long fingers steepled under his chin. His face was calm, but his dark eyes missed nothing, tracing the brutal lines of the derelict. Next to him, Security Officer Jin stood with his arms crossed. Where Tay was lean and thoughtful, Jin was solid and immediate, his posture radiating a readiness for violence that had never quite left him. "This is a mistake," Jin said, his voice a low rumble. "We scan it, log it, and push it into the nearest star. We have protocols for Kreon artifacts for a reason. They are not artifacts. They are traps." Tay nodded slowly, not taking his eyes off the ship. "The protocols exist because we understand so little. Jin, a Reaver has never been captured, only ever seen at the head of invasion fleets. This is an unprecedented chance. Its power core is dead. Life signs are zero. It is a ghost. We must listen to its story." "Some stories are better left untold," Jin countered. But the order had already come from Concordance Command. "Board and assess. Document the interior. Determine if any Kreon biohazards remained active." A team was assembled. Tay as lead scientist, Jin as security lead, 2 other researchers, and 4 armed peacekeepers in environment suits. The shuttle ride over was silent. The only sound was the soft hiss of air and the thump of hearts. The Reaver grew larger, blotting out the stars. Up close, its hull was a tapestry of scars, weapon impacts, atmospheric burns, and strange, organic-looking growths that had hardened into stone-like plates. They docked using a magnetic seal on what appeared to be a secondary airlock. The Kreon design was predictably brutal. The outer door wasn't a sliding panel, but an iris of interlocking, sharpened metal teeth that retracted with a sound like grinding bones. The air inside was cold and still. Jin stepped through first, his weapon's light cutting a bright swath through the gloom. The hallway was tall, built for beings 8 feet high. The walls were not smooth metal, but a porous, dark substance that seemed to absorb the light. Strange, whip-like conduits ran along the ceiling, and the floor was ridged for traction. Everything felt oppressive, designed to intimidate. Tay followed, his scanner whirring. Atmosphere is stale but breathable. Trace toxins well below lethal for us. No radiation spikes. His light fell on the walls. Fascinating. The interior structure is grown, not built. Bioorganic engineering. They moved in a tight formation. The first chamber they found confirmed every horror story. It was a shrine, or perhaps a trophy room. The walls were lined with alcoves, and in each alcove was a skeleton. Not Kreon skeletons. Dozens of different species, all arranged in poses of agony or submission. In the center of the room was a dark stone altar with deep grooves channeling to a central basin. A pain altar, Tay whispered, his academic curiosity fighting with visceral disgust. The Kreon channeled psychic agony as a power source for some of their systems. They would sacrifice captives here. Jin's jaw was tight. Like I said, a mistake. This whole place is a grave. They pressed on, finding more evidence of the Kreon's cruel genius. Racks of kinetic weapons that fed on the user's own bioelectricity, causing pain with every shot. Hibernation pods for their infamous shock troops, the creatures still inside, but long dead. Viewports that showed not the stars, but swirling, maddening patterns designed to unsettle prey. But then, in a corridor leading to the lower decks, Tay's scanner pinged softly. Hold. He knelt, running his hand over a section of the wall. The bioorganic material was different here, smoother. This is a repair. A hull breach was sealed here. He looked closer. This weld. It's not Creon. Their fusion is messy, almost angry. This is precise, deliberate. This is a field weld, done by hand. Jin shone his light over it. The repair was a jagged scar of metal, crudely effective, but utterly foreign to the ship's aesthetic. It was the first crack in the narrative of a purely Creon tomb. Deeper still, they found a sealed chamber whose door, unlike the sharp irises, had been manually wedged open with a piece of broken support beam. Jin had to squeeze through. Inside, his light revealed something impossible. The chamber was small, probably a storage cell, but it had been transformed. The frightening, porous wall material had been scrubbed clean in one area and covered with a soft, luminous green moss that emitted a gentle, calming light. It was earth moss, a species Tay recognized from xenobiology files. It needed water, specific nutrients, and care to grow. In the center of the floor, free of dust, sat a small object. Tay picked it up. It was a figurine, about the size of his thumb, carved from a light wood. It was a rabbit, with long ears and a gentle, serene expression. The carving was simple but skillful, the kind of thing made to pass time, to bring comfort. Jin stared at the little rabbit and at the glowing moss. The cold, brutal certainty in his eyes wavered, replaced by profound confusion. "What is this?" he murmured, not to Tay, but to the room itself. Tay turned the figurine over in his hand. The silence of the ship changed then. It was no longer just the silence of death. It was the silence of a pause, of a breath held. The story they had come to find, the simple, horrifying story of a dead Creon warship, was gone. In its place was a mystery. Someone else had been here. Someone had repaired this lethal vessel with careful hands. Someone had grown a garden in the dark. And someone had carved a small, peaceful animal from a piece of wood, leaving it behind like a signature. Tay looked from the rabbit to the harsh, terrifying architecture around them. The two images refused to reconcile. He slipped the figurine into a sample bag. "We keep going," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "The story isn't over. It's just not the one we expected to hear."